Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to give it about 30 seconds to a minute just to let a few more people join, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are really excited to have a discussion around our most recent survey, the State of Global Experience, the report that came with it, and talk about the implications of what some of these findings mean for the industry. So hosting you today, we have myself. I am a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Lilt, and we have Paula Shannon, our Chief Evangelist. Paula, I'll give you a minute to briefly introduce yourself.
Oh, Allison, thanks. I mean, I don't really need to take much introduction. I'm just thrilled to be here. You know, when we did this survey now for the second time, it's just an honor to be able to be part of the team sharing what is really primary research. You know, I think I am similar to many people on the webinar. There's just not ever enough primary information, you know, about our industry, about how our clients or our end users behave. So this will be fun today. I'm looking forward to it, to kicking off. And hopefully we'll have lots of questions at the end, because you and I have set this up so that we can take ad hoc questions on both the report content and any of the comments that we share as we go through it.
Great. Thank you so much for that. One quick housekeeping thing that I'll add, there is a Q&A functionality in GoToWebinar. So for anyone who's listening, feel free to drop in questions. We will do our best to get to them either in real time, or we'll also save some time at the end for questions as well. Great, well, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so for those of you who are joining us for the first time and potentially, you know, don't have much exposure to what the survey is, we'll take a minute to go through some introduction around what the report is, why we host it, what we even mean by State of Global Experience as we refer to this this new business function and focus. Then we'll take a look at some of the findings from the report. So how companies are actually managing this today, what some of the strategy implications and discussions are that are happening within various organizations that are managing their global experience strategically. We'll take a look at the implications of building out a proactive, actively managed digital customer journey on the enterprise level. And then we'll take a look at some of the trends that we're seeing as far as where this function is going from a business capacity. All right, so just to briefly give some overview around global experience, this is a somewhat new term that people have heard, so it's always helpful to introduce it, give some background around what we mean by global experience when we talk about this, and why we even oriented our entire survey this year around global experience and the role that it can play in a business. And to level set on why global experience is so important, there's a trend that's been happening with customers recently, and not just in the past year or two, it's been happening over the past 5 years, but of course the events of the past 3 years really did expedite the process to a digital forward customer experience, where when you look at all of the different touch points that a customer might have as they're interacting with a company, more often than not, those interactions today are digital. So what you're looking at in front of you is a stat from a McKinsey survey where they noted that 65% of customer interactions in today's world are digital. This is a pre-pandemic stat, so it likely is even higher than that at this point. But what that means is that when you as a company think about how customers are interacting with your brand and with your products and services, more likely than not, that interaction is digital. And that has fundamental implications for how you think about designing your customer experience, how you think about designing your collateral, how you think about interacting with customers generally. And so when you think about what that means across the customer journey, you begin to realize that there are all of these different touch points that all fit together to make one cohesive customer journey. And traditionally, people have heard customer experience and they've had a fairly narrow lens, and they thought it just means this one little bubble of support. But in reality, as customers start to interact across 10 to 20 touch points per customer, it becomes much more comprehensive. And the customer's journey with a company starts at the very first touch point, whether they are introduced to you through a press release or some sort of social media or an ad of some kind online. But in that very initial awareness funnel, then when they move to the next phase in the customer journey, where they actually start thinking about your business as a solution, whether it's a product or a service that you're offering, something that has value to them, they start to actually consider it. And then if they continue to move along that funnel through purchasing, where they actually purchase your product or service, and then ideally they love it so much that they come back again and again, and you retain them as a customer in perpetuity. So as you look across all of these steps in the customer journey, there are countless touch points. And what happens often is that the teams that are managing these touch points are discrete and siloed. And so there's a lot of opportunity for very quickly one of those touch points to break. And that's just in the first language that company has designed that experience, and if they have designed it. And so when you add in this component of language, it quickly becomes very, very, very complex. So when we say global experience, what we mean is the customer experience that's being delivered to every customer globally, no matter where they are, no matter what language they speak, across every touch point where they could potentially interact with your company. And so that is the theme, and that is the focus of this year's survey and report, is how companies at an enterprise level are managing this, managing the design and execution and delivery of customer experiences globally across every market. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that language sort of brings in this complexity to it. And one of the key findings of this year's survey, just to give you a bit of a teaser, was that 95% of business stakeholders believe that language of choice is an important factor throughout the customer journey. When you think about it logically, it's not that unintuitive, but this is a pretty meaningful stat, in the sense that this means virtually almost every business stakeholder, almost every customer thinks that language is a really important component of that customer experience. And so we'll get into some discussions later today, but when you start to look at the potential of language as compared to what companies invest and sort of do in their management of it, you can see a bit of a discrepancy there that we will jump into. And then the other, sort of to give a bit of a teaser around something that this year's report revealed, was that the majority of companies are seeing an increase in volume of content generally, and also volume of content in terms of needing that content to be multilingual. So if the base volume of content is increasing and the number of markets in which companies have a presence is also increasing, then by the sort of transitive implications of that, you get to this point where companies are really focused on making that content available, not just in that initial language and base experience, but also in that experience for every customer across every market. So you can see a very dramatic need here for an increase in attention paid to how just such a bigger volume of demand that requires a scale that previously has not existed in most enterprise functions. Okay, so I briefly will give some background on the report for those of you who are sort of joining or have less context for the first time on this report. And Wilt runs an annual survey, and there are reports and findings based off of that to assess the current state of the industry. We do this, we've done it for multiple years now, and this year's State of Global Experience survey, and the survey the report findings are based off of, is a global survey. So in terms of those that participated in this survey and contributed to the findings from this report, about half were based in North America, about a quarter were based in Europe, and then we have a smattering around the rest of the world as well. So what you're seeing represented here and in the findings that we share today is not just not just a regional finding, really something that's happening at a global scale. Again, when thinking about the participants of this survey and who are feeding into this report, there's also a pretty wide spread as far as the different industries that are represented. So we always have a large volume of participants from software and technology. There, of course, is an opportunity for overlap between software and technology across most verticals, but we also had good representation this year from participants in healthcare, from participants in financial services. We had an increasing presence from retail and e-commerce, and then sort of a smattering across a number of different verticals. That some are more digitally oriented and some are more in person, but we had participants from both. All right, and then lastly, when thinking about where these findings are coming from, we also had a fairly wide spread of representation across enterprise stakeholders at various levels of experience and management. So we did have a large segment this year of participants who were at an executive or VP level, which really was valuable in contributing to some of the implications around strategy and how businesses think about this more holistically and manage this cross-functionally. Then we had some sort of mid-management at the manager level, some director, which are often the people who sort of sit in between the sort of higher level strategy and then the execution. And then we also had some sort of entry level and then associate as well. So we have a really good representation from very tactical to very strategic, which is why you'll see momentarily we had some quite rich findings this year. So before I jump into it in too much detail, I do want to pause. Having given that background, Paula, I mean, you read the report. Would love to hear any initial reactions, sort of things that jumped out at you, just sort of caught your attention.
Yeah, I mean, Allison, I think the two findings that you highlighted, this idea of language being the missing piece, this language of choice being a prime mover for end users and consumers. We've seen a few of these statistics before, even in the original kind of common sense advisory data. They came out strongly, right? And they showed us in different locales and markets just how profound that bias was, people either not wanting to shop or people kind of being loyal to a brand if the content or the experience was in their local language. So it shouldn't be surprising, but 95% statistical response in anything is always kind of very reassuring. So this means that people are expressing a very strong preference. Back when we first got data, we rarely saw that tip above 75% that people would say, yes, this matters. And then I guess it's no surprise, that it's still a missing piece. So I think moving beyond the 2 points that you highlight, the things that jumped out for me as we scratch below the surface are in 2 buckets. One is we've got some info to share about kind of what is this misalignment? Like, so if it is so important and if corporate leaders understand that global experience or customer experience really moves the bar on their corporate initiatives of growth, customer acquisition, retention. Well, so why then is there still a gap in the investment and the alignment of various corporate functions who all are pursuing the same goal, but it seems they're getting in each other's way? Or worse, they're actually not in the same room, right? And then the second thing that we'll dive in that really jumped out for me, and I don't want to get ahead of some of the data, but I have maybe preconceived notions. If we went back to the slide that you showed, that digital customer journey, and we've all become more familiar with that concept in the last 10, 12, 13 years, that it is not linear and that it is cyclical, and these touch points are just ever revolving and combine really to generate the customer experience we want. Well, I think that my bias has probably always been that the early touch points, I guess I still think in a linear way, right? That it's the investigation, the discovery phase is critical. you know, that if you get the customer engaged, if you use localized content on a website, in your promotion, in your marketing, well, surely that's got to make sense. And I think the report that we'll share in our third section of our webinar is we have some pretty interesting stats that showed customer support, you know, a kind of almost not throwaway, but we've always felt that, you know, if customer support were good enough, that was okay as a digital touch point. So we're seeing that that might be a cultural bias, and I'll talk a bit more about why I think that is a bias perhaps of North American or European companies. So that's pretty interesting. And there's also some bright spots, and I'll share that, yes, we are suffering maybe from this 10 or 12 years of people not being in the same room to tackle the alignment. But it's a hard problem. I mean, you showed over 20 digital touch points, and that's kind of a one-dimensional view. What if we then build out for the 40, 80, 120 languages or locales that are involved in all those touch points? This is an all company, all hands-on issue, and it really has not been in the past. So the last point is, you know, I think localization has always wanted the issue of localization to be a C-suite issue. You know, the dream is that you're going to go in and pitch a CEO who says, oh my goodness, yeah, you know, yes, we need you, you know, we need to do that. And it rarely is. I think global experience, with the advent of the global CXO, it's finally a C-suite issue. And I think I had a quote, there was a great article in Harvard Business Review not very long ago, and Adam Richardson, a writer, said, customer experience is the sum totality of how customers engage with your company and brand. And it's not just a snapshot in time, but throughout the entire arc of being a customer. So there's nobody in the business world that is not chasing after this right now and realizing that whatever imperatives they have from investors or shareholders or colleagues, it's all around growth and customer acquisition and retention. And this is where it starts and stops. So I think it's kind of exciting. I look forward, maybe we can jump into a couple of these data points and then tease out between you and me what we think it might mean, you know, both today and for the future.
Great, yeah. Yeah, before I jump into this, I mean, two things. I think you have a really good call out about sort of that sequential journey being very one-dimensional, and that's a gross simplification of what the customer journey really is, in the sense that it is recurring, and they do circle back and weave about, and so it's extremely complex, and it just requires a different way of managing it. And then I think something that you just mentioned triggered. You know, I recently read an article in the Wall Street Journal that 90% plus of companies now have a CXO. And so I think you're absolutely right that this is becoming more of a thing that companies are realizing. There needs to be a cross-functional initiative and perspective here, because the siloed focus just isn't working and isn't delivering what we need to deliver. So very, very powerful. Okay, so let's jump into some of our findings. One section of our report focused around how companies are currently managing global experience at their company, and then sort of looking at what the strategy is and should be, and then looking at how that is executed. And one of the very interesting sort of findings that came out of this was that 78% of companies or respondents wish their companies would provide more localized experiences than they currently do. And so qualitatively, I don't have numbers behind this, but in some of the conversations that we do often have with customers, we do hear, you know, we're focusing on these 4 touch points. But when you think about that entire customer journey, again, 4 touch points out of 10 or 20 is really only scratching the surface of what it could be. So this was pretty powerful, thinking, you know, the large majority of participants really did express an interest in localizing more, but were restricted for one reason or another. Moved a little fast there. And then another stat that really jumped out, and there were some good qualitative comments in the survey as well, around the ability of companies to build a strategy around this function cross-functionally. So thinking again through that customer journey map that I showed before, if you think about the number of teams that are involved in that, you've got various different teams contributing content, contributing execution, and what a number of respondents reported was that across those different functions, cohesive message. So, the message that the marketing team was delivering to the customer was not the same as the message that the customer support team was delivering to the customer, was not the same as the messaging the product team was using in the actual product or in the service to the customer. And so the result of that was this sort of inconsistent, non-cohesive messaging across each customer journey and then across locales and markets as well, because there wasn't much collaboration across teams within one market, and then there certainly wasn't collaboration with teams across various markets as well. So that is pretty powerful to see that the majority of companies and respondents are not focused on some sort of cohesive messaging, which, if you think about the implications for company brands, are fairly substantial at a global scale. And then the majority also reported that their company did not have strategic alignment on global experience. So again, thinking about, to your point earlier, Paula, your comment around having executive focus on this issue and making sure that at a leadership level, there was a focus on being strategically aligned across departments. So that as you think as a company about what your marketing team is doing, or what your strategy team is doing, or what your product team is doing, or what your localization team is doing, that they're all aligned and that strategically everyone is moving towards the same goal and the same North Star. But as of today, it sounds as though most companies, or the majority of companies, are not doing this. So that lack of alignment is fairly interesting. And there's been a lot of work done around how the larger a company gets, often the larger it becomes to have that strategic alignment, because it is sort of company nature often to move towards a more siloed function. So that is certainly an area that I think we'll see more businesses start to pay attention to in the future. All right, and then lastly, an interesting component of the survey that we didn't do last year, we did this year, and I'm so glad we did, is that we tried to get a better sense of which teams at different companies are involved in global experience management. And really interesting finding here that while there still is sort of a lack of strategic alignment and cohesive messaging across all of these teams, it is becoming more cross-functional. So if you look at some of the numbers that jump out at you here, our survey last year was primarily focused, or primarily engaged with localization professionals, and this year it became much more expansive. And what we learned from that and from some of those inputs is that there are a large number of teams who are involved in global experience management now. So in marketing, 41%, that says almost half the companies out there are involved in marketing in some capacity. There have also been, that one especially jumps out at me because there have been some really interesting, I believe it was Gartner recently released a report around customer experience generally, and how marketing is playing an increasing role in managing customer experience, because they own so many of the touch points. So that wasn't totally shocking, but was validating to see that so many marketing teams are involved now in global experience. This second big category here of about 1 in 3, give or take, of sort of customer experience or customer support are also taking increasing ownership in this cross-functional function. And then you can see sort of a smattering here across product, digital strategy, IT, operations, and sales. And I think what this does indicate is that while businesses aren't quite there yet, as it is not necessarily sort of an accepted business norm to make sure you're managing this function across teams in a collaborative way, there is a move in that direction. So that's really promising. And the companies that were more digital forward, is how I'll frame it, tended often qualitatively in their feedback to report a more cross-functional effort in this area. So having gone through some of those, again, I'd love to pause, Paula, and hear some of your thoughts. And I think maybe I'll sort of, for the report, jump back here because this one really caught my attention.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear just either qualitatively from discussions you've had with peers in your network or sort of from what you've been seeing in the space, why do you think more companies have not yet reached the point of strategic alignment or making this a strategic priority?
Yeah, I mean, because that's the question that we're really talking about is, you know, in a digital world, a lag of 10 or 12 years since we learned that this is how things were going to execution is really indefensible, right? I mean, it's an eons. So I had a wonderful boss who used to say that business models should evolve and follow computing models, and that in fact they always did over time. They always evolved. So therefore, if you look at the digital journey, what it says is that a forward-looking company should evolve, you know, their structure and their organization to mirror that. And so let's just think about what that means for big companies. You mentioned, you know, how complex it gets in really, really large companies. You know, they're struggling and arguing about, do we organize by product? Do we organize by geo or region? Do we go large companies, mid-market, you know, SMB? Do we organize by end market and we serve financial, or we serve healthcare and life sciences? So there's already a lot of agita around how to organize in a company environment. And what this is suggesting is maybe that you would blow that up. And I've yet to see a company that's organized around chunks of the customer experience journey, the digital journey. But realistically, you know, unless people are focused on the same goal, it's very difficult. So Stephanie Lotz is with McKinsey, and you know it's time to change when McKinsey has an entire practice dedicated to this, right? She's actually, I think, based in France. She has a very unique European view on this, and her quotation was, she's on consumer-facing topics beyond just the digital journey, as well as kind of service redesign in companies. So how do you structure to attack this problem? And she says, leading executives have recognized that really moving the needle on customer satisfaction requires a more ambitious effort, a transformation of the customer experience. So, but the conclusion I'm getting to is we haven't done that. Most companies have not bravely transformed themselves to focus on this customer experience, number one. So number two, I think if we jump to the slide that you shared, Allison, if you don't mind, about the diversity of people who are working in a cross-functional way for a global experience, I see this as really a great news slide, because in my career, it was more typical that the person responsible for the global experience, the localization, was kind of marooned in the IT department or the R&D department. Why? Because it was hard, it was technical, it was difficult to do this stuff. And I think as you saw the advent of marketing becoming a much more ROI-driven function in the company, much more scientific in their go-to-market approach, and you know, marketing able to justify to a CFO, if you give us $1 of investment, we will generate X dollars of revenue, you know, down the line. I think that just upended everything. And so we're a little bit slow to align, but this is great news for me. You've got, you know, 78% here, if you couple the customer experience and marketing, on the completely different side of the company from where localization may have historically hung out. So I've seen this firsthand. I've seen digital marketing operations take the lead. I've seen people use very different metrics to assess the value of localization. Once you move into the sphere, you know, you're looking at engagement, you're looking at net promoter scores and customer satisfaction, not typos per 100 or some kind of less useful benchmark. So it's really good. And I think as suppliers of services or technology, you want to be aligned with what the business imperative is of your customer. It's a lot more of a wonderful battle to join arms if everyone's focused on increasing customer retention or improving customer sat. So I think this is a great news slide. I really love that. And you know, when you look at kind of where things are migrating, lastly, I am a firm believer that we're seeing the advent of the CXO I'm so sorry about that. Hang on just a sec. The CSXO as a C-suite executive, and localization belongs tucked in under that person.
Yeah, I think that's right. The representation across teams and exactly what you've just been saying is that I don't know that businesses have fully figured out exactly what the best way is to manage this yet, and you see that in where it sits. There's no one clear answer yet, and it may not be the same answer by company. There may be, depending on how you're intending to shape that customer experience, it may be there's a different approach. There's no one right approach, but there's definitely a lot of thrashing, I would say, in the current market as companies realize they need to react to this, but don't know exactly how they do it yet because there's no one best way to do it yet.
Yeah, but again, I mean,
okay.
We have enough bad news, right? Out there in the world. I really do think this slide is a good news slide because, at least the right teams care about this. People are engaged, as opposed to a world where, it was some far-flung region of the world complaining about something and being ignored by core product groups or core teams in another geo. And I don't think that's clearly not what we're seeing anymore, which is great.
Right. Yeah. I mean, another difference, but I don't think we have a slide about it in here, but as compared to last year, is that historically, localization professionals have spent a large portion of their time just evangelizing localization, talking about what it means, talking about how you do it, talking about how you manage it. And it seems that it's trending towards more different, more teams across different functions, understanding that inherently, being aware that they need to pay attention to it, knowing that there's some role that it plays in how they engage customers. And hopefully that's eliminating some of that need for localization professionals to go out and evangelize it, because companies are somewhat more aware that it does need to be part of a holistic strategy. So,
Allison,
all right. And I know
our time. Maybe we jump into our last one, which is a pretty great takeaway. Let you set the stage for what we found in terms of kind of more the focus for this, where the greatest returns were, and then we can chat about that because I found this one pretty interesting too.
Great. All right, well, we won't dwell on this long, but as a refresher, we have spoken about how this is a complex journey. The minute that you introduce multiple languages into it, it becomes even more complex. So as companies think about how they manage each of these as an engagement tool, the higher volume of touch points there are, the more there is a need for strategic management of all of those for one cohesive experience. And so part of this year's survey was taking a look at each of those different touch points and understanding their perceived impact. And you can see customer support at the top. Website was perceived as a big sort of impact point in the customer journey. And then social media, which of course we're aware has become ever more present in virtually every single person's lives. I would bucket them akin to social media is ratings and reviews, which is another social component of gathering data about a company and about a brand. So I'll pause there, Paul, because I think you had some pretty strong thoughts or reactions to this emphasis on customer support as a key impactful touch point in the customer journey.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, Allison, it sounds almost disingenuous to say, oh, I'm surprised, that customer support would rate highly when we talk about touch points for customer sat. But I'm talking within our industry, and I think anyone on the call knows, we've had a bias, or companies have had a bias, that the marketing, the flash stuff, the product is really where the important focus has to be. And as an example or proof, we've often chosen customer support as a playground to try different solutions of good enough translation or kind of lower quality translation, thinking that it's not that important. I mean, the customer support is there in case of issue. It should be good. There should be good usability. But I found this surprising. I found that when you consider the discovery phase and its importance of ratings and reviews, that we're talking trust. You look at website, promotional information about the core product that supports rating above that. So I went back in my memory archives, right? And I started to realize, I think this is even more interesting for our industry than you and I are in a position to share today. And maybe hopefully for the report next year, we'll break this down by locale and get a really strong look, because I know, in the days where we would look at errors, and they're not usability errors, these are product errors or localization errors. We had a original computer manufacturer, and we would get ratings back, and I've even got the little rating scale that we used to use. Most people would be familiar. Like, you've got a 0, this is not an error at all. You've got 1, it's cosmetic. This is not a problem. The 3 might be a minor error. We should probably fix it in the next rev. 4 is, yeah, this is a major usability error. It should be fixed quickly, high priority. And then 4 is catastrophic. Like, this is a don't ship. This is a do not ship, stop production line. So those are really serious errors. So the example I'm getting to is that there was a translation error in Japanese on an install screen, kind of something that most of us would think is a little bit throwaway. I mean, it's not the flashy website, it's not financial content, it's just the download package app install screen, with the bar to show you the progress. And there was a typo. And so the local market in Japan felt that this was a level 4 do not ship error. And the domestic team was just blindsided, saying this is a 0 or a 1 at best. It's a cosmetic error. The logic for that locale was, if the very first interaction the customer has with our product is flawed, how will that affect the rest of the journey? And in their culture, it was a non-starter. It would destroy the rest of the journey and the trust. So I think these things are why we all love to work in our industry. It's the kind of stuff that we'd like to be ahead of the curve and advising the aligned team that hopefully in the future is in a room tackling this stuff. We want to maybe open their eyes and say, hey, not each of our locales is going to view support the same way. So let's not just have a bias that good enough Russian translation or German translation is okay for this content. So I thought that this was great. Really enjoyed seeing the stat. And I think that you've got a couple of other that follow just about the lack of alignment between kind of the potential impact of this and the spend that's happening. And I guess that's what I'm getting to, is it's not aligned again.
Yeah, let me jump to my next slide. That's a great segue. Another component, and again, Paul, I'll mainly let you speak to this, but another sort of element of our survey this year is that we took a look at how important some of these touch points were perceived to be in terms of impact. And then we took a look also at how effectively those touch points were being localized for global customers. So thinking about, let's say, a customer in France or in Japan, not only what were the most important touch points, but how effectively were they being localized. And customer support, there was a really interesting discrepancy.
Yeah, and I think this is a function of, the bias that is brought to different corporate functions when they are organized as a silo. So in my experience, the entire customer support operation domestically in source language, and then even as that transcended different languages and locales, was about cost obfuscation. It was about obviating the need for online call center representatives. Very high cost, high touch way to fix a problem. Definitely the way that most of us fixed problems, 10 years ago or more. So everything was about moving towards a more cost-effective support solution. And I think support is one of the functions in a company that's been most digitized in terms of, calls per agent, resolutions, the cost per resolution. Like they're just rich with metrics and data, and that's led to this kind of cost focus. Language as well. So we've been pushed by many big clients, appropriately pushed, to find cost-effective solutions to tackle this daunting mountain of support content that they were faced with. But we're seeing a 14% gap here between the impact that it has on their end users or their NPS scores and the amount that they feel is actually being dedicated or being effectively localized. So I think this makes us have to rethink our position that this is where we experiment or we take some chances, because it actually matters. And as I said, next year I'd like to see, does it matter more in certain high touch locales? That's my personal theory is high context locales will care more about this, and low context locales, of which North America is one, will care less. So we carry that bias to locales, and now if you're on the global CXO's team, you have a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very powerful story. I think thinking about that sort of that discrepancy in how those touch points are perceived by locale or by market, because any one market is effectively blind to that because culturally that is the norm for them. But when you think about it at a global scale, you can see how there would be those differences that would be impactful. And then I think, one last thing I'll highlight, and then maybe we'll browse through them because we are running short on time. Again, most respondents reported that most of their touch points were not fully multilingual. So only 12% said that their digital customer touch points were fully multilingual, which if you think about it means that the large majority of customer experiences that are being provided out there end to end are broken. So I think we sort of knew that qualitatively, but seeing it quantitatively was really powerful for me, at least, because it really, 12%, there's no getting around that. That means there are a large number of broken customer experiences out there. Yeah,
you're not even getting a participation medal for 12%, right? You're just like, it's a complete problem. And I was thinking about, the role of the mystery shopper, for a long time, both in bricks stores, and brick and mortar, but also online. So maybe we need like a mystery linguist who tests, the end-to-end digital experience in a given language and highlights for the company. Again, I don't see people doing that, and they did do that for physical interactions of shopping. We've demonstrated that 65% of the touch points are now digital, but I don't see it evolving to where the same anxiety is being put on the quality of each of those points in the digital realm. So listen, this is all great news for our industry and for people who are intrigued by all of this. It finally means that we're seeing the light of day. It is important. It is a C-suite issue. We're pitching maybe to the wrong C person. It's the CXO, maybe a little bit less than the CEO who cares about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that certainly is true for this industry. And also, if we have those who are joining for the first time or are newer to this, I think it gives them a really tangible way to think about what the impact could be, which is that in broad strokes, that they likely have broken customer experiences, which they may not have thought about from a language perspective before. So really, really interesting and powerful. Okay, I know we're running very short on time, so I will skim through this and then I think we'll take a few questions, which is that, I'll just highlight, we have one more interesting stat down here. About half of people said that looking forward, that one of their primary focuses would be just increasing that volume of localized content. Again, thinking back to the earlier stat around how demand for volume of content has grown substantially, companies are really focused on building out scale. So, we have this content in our base language. How do we now deliver it across 7 or 8 more languages? Because that's where our customers are, and that's the market where we need to be delivering more seamless experience. And then sort of from the non-localization perspective, many also noted that there has been a much bigger focus on the holistic global customer, not just on that base language. Whereas historically, you've seen companies investing millions and millions of dollars in that experience in that first language, and then sort of leaving additional languages to the wayside. That is shifting slowly, but it is shifting. So that was certainly interesting. And then more people, from across a number of different roles mentioned that they were seeing their competitors focus on this. And so this is becoming more of a competitive differentiator where you have to be delivering a seamless experience to your customers or you're falling behind. And that really jumped out at me because that is one where the business world is moving so fast now. The fact that businesses are able to see, oh, this is something we have to do for status quo effectively. This is no longer even a differentiator. This is, if we're not doing it, we're falling behind. So that really jumped out.
Allison, there was an article by a woman named Carrie Bodine, and she wrote a book called Outside In, obviously all about kind of rethinking the way that your company functions. And it's about customer experience. And she put it, her quote was, exceptional customer experiences are the only sustainable platform for competitive differentiation. Like that's it. There's nothing else that really long-term will ensure value. And I think that's what we're finding here is that it's finally starting to align with what we've always believed, that this matters and that consumers care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Great, okay. And we're very short on time, so obviously there was more to cover here than we could possibly cover in 30 minutes, but we'll try and leave a few minutes for questions at the end. I will say to those of you who are on the line, I would recommend taking a look at the report. There is a lot of focus on getting the right strategy into place and thinking more holistically about how all of those different touch points fit together and from the customer perspective. That was really a key theme that resonated throughout, is sort of thinking through what the customer sees and then thinking in experiences and thinking about how that impacts customer engagement. With that, we do have a few questions. So I'll read one that just came in, which is, many of the insights here seem to assume that you're targeting buyers, decision makers, and potential customers with your multilingual products and communications. How does the dynamic change when the buyer is English only, buying on behalf of their multilingual colleagues?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's not dissimilar to kind of what we saw happen early on with software, because in the early days, companies had a hard time understanding how much of their revenue was international in locale, like in Spanish, in French, because many corporate buyers, like I'm thinking back where the initial consumers of software were not consumers, it was more business, and the business buyers were buying in English for multilingual users. And so the quick answer is very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult if you're working through intermediaries to understand what the end user's preferences are. You're going to be subject to the bias of that intermediary. One of the cool things about a 65% digital journey is that that's all been designed to get you so that you can be in direct contact with the individual. It's all about personal, immediate, relevant content. And I think for that to work, you've got to be in contact with the actual end user. So great question. I don't have the perfect answer for it, other than, we did see that story before and it doesn't end very well, so.
Yeah, I think I would add one tiny thing to that. I can't see who asked the question, but would be happy to follow on to this. I think
Allison, I think we're having some trouble with your feed. I just wanted to check and make sure it wasn't anything that I was doing. I think you're back, but
okay.
we just
I'm so sorry about that. Apparently, most of Northern California has been having problems with their Wi-Fi. So
you and I work so closely together, I was figuring I would just jump in and kind of take the next question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know what looks like one of the next questions coming up, so go ahead.
Let's see. All right. Yes, sorry again about that. Okay. Yes, so one additional question that we had come through, that's what I was just pulling up here, is, all right, so one interesting question, I think this ties back again to a core theme that's been coming through today, which is executive buy-in and communicating why this is so important. And so a question that we received is, So how do you get leadership to actually buy into managing this strategically in a centralized way? Understanding that each team may be using a different tool, each team may have different processes. How do you communicate to your executive that this is something that needs to be top-down, leadership-driven? It can't be a back office function, because if it does, it will never receive the appropriate focus that it needs to really be impactful.
Well, I love this question because I believe in this really for everything through business. I mean, it's certainly what I experienced and saw, and that is you have a responsibility. I mean, if you wish to be a leader, I mean, if this is part of your ambition is to drive change along this continuum, Allison, that you're sharing here, the digital journey, then you have a responsibility to understand, one, how your company makes money, two, the difference between, the P&L results and cash flow, and three, you need to quantify the value, the true value, not some moral outrage or some, well, we have to, we must, or we're in France, ergo thus we need to do this. It cannot be emotional. It has to be absolutely grounded in pure finance. And so you have to look then at the areas of this digital journey where you're likely to have like thinkers, and maybe start with partnering. So support, I mentioned, the treasure trove of data about the value of customer support, the cost of retention. You get recurring revenue statistics from them. Marketing, there used to be a somewhat, a little bit of animosity between the different groups, but marketing, with all of the digital tools they have today, the ability to track the value of campaign through, conversion and retention, they're your best friends. So you need to have your data up to snuff. You need to be as good as these other departments that have become completely quantified. And then the elusive figure, you must show the value of localization on each of these things. And personally, I think in the old days, we would just try to show the value on revenue. How much revenue could you drive if you localized into Chinese? I think now the smart exec will show the value at each one of these circles. And the message then to leadership is, you will not unlock that value unless we look at this holistically. And so if that's what you want to bring about, you owe it to your colleagues and to your company to just do the work. And it's a ton of work. I mean, in some companies, it's very difficult to get this data. It's not impossible. It's never impossible to get the data. And I've never seen an executive get a presentation like this where perhaps you would be very honest and say, no, I've got hard data on these three things. This is an estimate. Here's how I came to it. Well, let someone in the room challenge it. That's the first rule of sales. If someone engages and disputes your figures, you're halfway there. So I think that that's the exciting part of this, is that we're so close to being able to prove that this matters. And I've waited a long time to see people lead at this level in the localization industry. It's fun.
Great. Yeah, we'll agree on that. It's a long discussion to have, but it can pay off if ultimately it results in support as is needed. Great. Okay. Well, I think that's about all we have time for today, unfortunately. So I do want to wrap. And for those of you who have other questions, feel free to reach out afterwards, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Paula, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share before we close out for today?
No, I mean, I've been even more opinionated than I normally am, but my only thought is I can't wait to see how this evolves when we do the surveys next year, or we look at other data, because this is more change in a short period of time than I've seen in a while, and I find it pretty fascinating. So it's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree with that. The business world has had to react, even though I don't think it's changed this much in the past 15 years combined. So yeah. It is very engaging to watch. Great. Okay, well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining today. I think with this, we will go ahead and wrap, but we would encourage you to go read the full report, and we would be happy to continue the conversation if people are interested to discuss more. So thanks again, and have a great day.
Thanks.